Alrighty, it's Ian here. You might have seen my last project in 1:72 scale called the Sharpshooter. This one is also going to be in 1:72 scale. It's a pretty well-known airplane crash from World War II, known as the AKUTAN Zero, or possibly Koga's Zero, named after the pilot, or the Aleutian Zero, named after the island chain where it crashed. It crashed on June 4th, 1942, so early in the war for the United States. It's a pretty important crash because it left the U.S. In possession of an basically flyable Zero aircraft that took pretty minimal fixing up before they got it in the air, giving them a much better understanding of the flying capabilities of that aircraft and of its strengths and weaknesses. The way it crashed was the pilot had done some strafing and his airplane was damaged. He thought he could land it on what looked like solid grassy ground, but instead turned out to be a bog. So when he first touched down, the wheels dug in and flipped the aircraft over, landing on the cockpit canopy and breaking the neck and killing the pilot. You can see here that this diorama is going to require me essentially building a pristine version of a Zero aircraft and then damaging it a little bit, placing it upside down in a bog. The bog is going to be a little tricky because it's long, uniform grasses, not just little tufts. Here's another picture of it from the side. But I'm going to give it a try and see if I can make it turn out to look anything like this. I'm not going to post any final pictures of it beforehand because I want to leave you in suspense as to whether I can pull this off. The same suspense I'm left in at the start of every single project. The first step is going to be to take this old frame, which is a technique I've never tried before, but I've seen it online. It's a really nice way to frame your diorama because it's got a nice attractive edge and a pretty stable base. There does not need to be much change in elevation of the terrain. It's all basically flat. So what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to seal the edge with some caulk, and then I'm going to paint this all black. And then I'm just going to build up the terrain from there, probably using dark brown paint and then grasses and so on. Kind of at the same time, I'm going to be building the airplane, and I'll show you a little bit more about that as well. And get into some of the details of the great Zero paint scheme controversy I'm sure you're dying to hear. So I'll start the project and get back to you in a minute. It's only been about a minute, because this didn't take very long, but I put my CAULK all over the edge of the picture frame to seal it so the liquid epoxy resin doesn't leak out when I apply that. All we have to do now is wait for my CAULK to harden, which will take about a day, and then I'll be able to paint this and proceed from there. If you're wondering why I'm spelling out CAULK and not saying that word, just say the two previous sentences that I said, but instead say the word CAULK, and you'll understand perfectly well why I spelled it out. Just a quick aside to show you I've got the base painted. It only took about a day for the caulk to harden. And that's the phraseology I'm using now, the caulk to harden. And I painted it matte black. It's still maybe a little wet, but it'll dry more flat looking than gloss. I've got all the parts cut off the sprue down to the point where I can basically paint them. So now I'm just working on paint colors, and I'll start doing that and putting this thing together here in the near future and getting the base done. Making pretty good progress here. I've distressed this wingtip and then super glued aluminum foil onto the cut edges to simulate aluminum skin. Once this is primed and painted, I think it'll look pretty good. Did the same thing as well with those weird flaps. You can see on the other side they're glued where they are in the photograph. And when that's primed and painted, then I'll bend them into the correct position as dictated by the reference photo. For this part that goes over the engine, I've done the same thing. I cut the plastic and then glued aluminum foil and painted it the dark black blue color and deformed the aluminum foil how I wanted to so it matches the reference photo. The cowling for the cockpit, I just took a gray Sharpie and colored that. You're not going to hardly see it, if at all. Plus, it'll be a little bit muddy because it will be partially submerged. And so I'm not really putting any time into this because, as I like to say, if you can't see it, it ain't there. And you'll barely be able to see it. For the fuselage, I took some of my cheap green rattle cans and painted the cockpit and the sidewalls. The cockpit is in one shade of green and the sidewalls are in another shade of green, and I think they look pretty good. On the other hand, you'll hardly see these either, maybe just a glimpse, since it will be underneath the upturned airplane. Got a lot of other pieces painted. So right now I'm in the process of priming and painting the light gray. Just a word on the Great Zero painting controversy. There's a lot of controversy on what colors zeros should be painted. The original ones are kind of a light beige. That's how they come out fresh from the factory. However, after some use, apparently that light beige, people tell me, fades to a light gray. Some people say it's a blue gray. Some people say it's a green gray. I say it's going to be whatever light gray I can buy from my local Menards for $6. So that's the color gray I'm using, but I think it actually is kind of the right kind of gray. So I'll be painting it with that light gray. Since these are big surface areas, I am going to prime these first. I'm going to use a white primer for that. Because I think this is a pretty light gray. I don't want to use anything darker than a white primer, otherwise it'll make the main gray spray paint darker than I think it should be. That's where I'm at. Oh, you can see too, I've completed painting earth brown on the base, which I then textured by dabbing it up and down with the bristles of a brush to give it just a little bit more texture. Most of that will be covered up anyway, but there are parts you might be able to see, so I want to make sure that looks right. Anyway, back again once I get a little bit more done, and then we'll talk about the base in more detail. Made a bit of progress since I last videoed. I've got the wing put together, painted, primed and painted. Same with the fuselage. I used panel liner only in a few select spots. Where there was any piercing of the aluminum skin. First I would dirty up the outside of the hole. I would make the hole either with a drill and a small bit, or I would take a hobby knife, and like I did here, I would only make the very beginning of a hole with the drill, and then I would have the hobby knife do the rest, pressing and then spinning it around. And then I would take it and I'd gouge out the edge of the hole to make it a little bit more organic looking. In those areas, I use panel liner because it fills in all the little gouges and gaps really well. I used it here in the wheel wells as well because it fills and flows into all the little gaps and accentuates it nicely. That's basically the only oil-based medium I want to use on top of my base coat of paint, which is oil-based. You want to do the bulk of your weathering with acrylics because they're much more forgiving. You can take water and erase mistakes, or if you apply it a little heavy in a spot, you take a wet and Q-tip and you can smooth it out. So what I would do is I take a Q-tip with a soft tip still. I dip it a little bit of black acrylic paint, not much. I dab it off on a piece of paper like an index card, and then you just run it across here. Real easy to do. It kind of gives a nice random looking appearance. Like I said, if you feel like it goes on too heavy, you take a Q-tip that's been moistened and you can go like this and smooth it out. Very simple, very quick, and very easy, and actually kind of fun to do in its own way. That process seems to be going along reasonably well. Now I have to think about the base. Now when I apply static grass and put, foliage in, some of it's going to be packed close together, and it's going to be almost impossible to pour liquid epoxy resin between those areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Finish floor gloss, and I'm going to paint basically the whole base with finished floor gloss so it looks a little bit shiny, like maybe it could be water. And then when I do the grasses, and I'll map that out in a little bit, there's going to be gaps where I can very easily pour the liquid epoxy resin. The rest of it might be a little hard to get between every blade of grass and every little area. So I'm counting on the finished floor gloss to look as if the grass is based in water in those areas I can't get the epoxy resin into. So that's where I'm at with the kit. I'll keep plugging away and get back to you in a little bit. That kind of rhymed, didn't it? Unintentional. I'm going to try it again, build it up a little more. I just don't want to have to resort to liquid epoxy resin because that's just going to cut down the amount that I can put on for my last most important pour. There's only about, a finger depth there before it starts to get up over the frame side. I can probably go up to about there. So I don't want to have to do that if I don't need to, so I'm going to try a little bit more floor gloss. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to have to resort to liquid epoxy resin. The next thing I have to do is paint my yellow stripe on the plane. The decal kit comes with a bunch of red circles and a red stripe. Well, this airplane didn't have a red stripe. It had a yellow stripe. It's still debated on whether there's a yellow stripe at the bottom here. I go back and forth on whether I'm going to do that one. It's going to be a bother, so I'm kind of leaning towards not. I'm not sure it's going to be seen anyway. And since there is debate on whether there was even a stripe there, I'm going to settle the debate and say no. However, there does need to be a yellow stripe here. You can see I've taped up, masked quite a bit of the airplane, essentially all of the airplane. Now, when you use rattle cans like I do and you don't have an airbrush, accuracy of your paint spray comes into question, let's say. So the worst thing to do is to cut corners and then find out when you unwrap it that some paint spray leaked onto other parts of the aircraft. That can then be an incredible pain in the A to redo. So it does pay to be careful and thorough. So I've got it going all the way around. I have, I think, a good color of yellow paint to make it look the right color. You don't want it to be bright, glossy yellow. You want to look like a bunch of guys in a factory just grabbed a paint thing, masked it off, and painted it. It's surprising when you look at these planes sometimes, not how sloppy, but just, how variable the paint is. And also reading up on paints for World War II aircraft, just how different the various factories might have. They may have a slightly different color. They might have a slightly different thickness and finish. My finish is going to be whatever yellow I like the most from my local hardware store. And I doubt anybody can say that's not the exact shade because honestly, there's a lot of debate on the shades of these things. So that's what I do next, and then put the airplane together and then do additional weathering. Did you think I was done weathering with just that little bit of black acrylic paint I put on there? No. Okay, back in a bit. Well, that's the end of part one of my attempt at building the AKUTAN ZERO. Hopefully you're in suspense as to whether I can make it look anything at all like what you see on the screen. Of course, I know the answer to that. You don't, but I do. And I might encourage you to check out part two unless you're completely bored out of your mind, which is possible. I mean, these are not the most dynamic videos in the world. On the other hand, aren't you a little curious?